I went off to Paris to start modeling, and it sounds so much more glamorous than it was. I was a rebellious teenager. I was questioning authority. Who really knows the truth? Who really knows what's right and what's wrong? Who's to say? And I knew that what I was holding in my hands was the truth. And as I read, my life was forever changed.
In Fairfield County, something new comes across my desk every day. Crimes are committed, cases are solved, and a community is made safe by the hardworking employees of the Fairfield County Sheriff's Office. Welcome to This Week with Sheriff Dave Phelan, a weekly program here on LSN Television. We're also carried by a number of the radio affiliates here in Lancaster. Do appreciate you, the viewers and listeners that join us each and every week. The students here at the Fairfield Christian Academy, where this program is taped, our executive producer behind the scenes, Kelly Roberts, does a terrific job of lining the guests up and getting the questions together. Back by popular demand, second week in the row, is Sgt Lee Hawks, a veteran of the Fairfield County Sheriff's Office. How many years do you have in law enforcement now?
20.
20 years, wow. What's some of the changes you've seen in the last 20 years that really kind of come to mind?
Technology, very huge change in how we do things. I can remember actually typing some things on a typewriter or doing a lot of handwriting. We're very involved with computers these days. We have computers in the cars, getting email by cell phone, things like that. Makes us a little more efficient.
And I'll tell you, something just came to mind that really helps me out. And as you know, all the sergeants at the end of their shift, they go ahead and report what has happened during the last 8 hours, and they send that out. I get that on my phone every morning. It's the first thing I look at when I get up, and it's great technology because it tells me what happened in the jail the night before, what happened on the road, and you do a great job because you do a lot of details in those reports.
It's nice. It's something we can share with very little effort. Years ago we used to keep a book with shift events.
An unusual occurrence log.
Yeah, an unusual occurrence log. It would sit there, but it was only accessible to whoever could go get to that physical book.
Right.
Being able to have the internet and email and things like that, we can disperse that to the entire office if need be. It's invaluable for tips. If we have a picture of a suspect that needs identified, and we can send that out to literally anyone and get a response back rather quickly.
One of the things that we want to talk about is like traumatic events that happen to law enforcement officers day in, day out. Many times the public's not aware of these things. And I know you've been through a few of these events even within the last couple of years that have been very difficult to navigate through emotionally. How do officers cope with those kind of things?
Well, I think everyone has their own personal coping skills that may vary in many different ways. Family is obviously a key foundation to cope with some of those things. Law enforcement families can be pretty penalized by some of the traumatic events that happen to our law enforcement officers, or even our other. I would include our other first responders, such as fire, EMS, emergency room personnel, children's services. Mm-hmm. They see a lot of things that will affect them personally. And having a good, tight family foundation, understanding what a person goes through on a daily basis is very important.
And don't you think, too, if sometimes in law enforcement or the fire services, people really don't want to admit that they've got some concerns or they're troubled by things, how important counseling is in some of these
absolutely
situations.
Things can be very compounded. In my time, I have seen an individual experience a very traumatic event and resort to alcoholism instead of maybe seeking some help or talking with somebody and being able to get those issues out on the table, because these are very traumatic events that would pretty much constitute like a post-traumatic stress disorder.
Right.
If you compare law enforcement to soldiers, the things that a soldier sees on a daily basis, law enforcement and the other public safety see similar type events on a repeated basis.
And probably one of the things that law enforcement experiences is the tragedy of car accidents, and especially when you have children that have lost their lives in car accidents.
Absolutely, absolutely. Any crime involving a child or any death of a child is very difficult for anyone to endure, just as in human nature.
Right.
And the best way I think to express it to the public is look inside your own life when you've lost a loved one. And in our personal lives, we don't necessarily lose loved ones that often. Look at a law enforcement officer or a fireman or EMS and how often they see those types of things where they lose a patient or lose an individual involved in an accident. And we grieve with the family on those types of things.
I think you've even gone to some funeral homes, haven't you?
Absolutely, absolutely. I had a very bad car accident once where a teenager lost her life, and it took a rough toll on me. Emotionally, it was very difficult to endure, and just to pay respect to him and the family. I went to the vigil that was held at the high school. Very difficult situation to deal with. It's just as hard sometimes with us as it is for the family. Not quite as bad, but seeing it on a regular basis.
Yeah, and I was talking to Kelly Roberts, our executive producer, before airtime, and one thing that she kind of mentioned, and I think it's worth talking about, is the fact that in a given shift, in an 8-hour shift where you have an officer, a law enforcement officer, they may have been involved in seeing been through a very horrific set of circumstances, but then the next thing they know, they're being called to somebody's house or they're involved in a traffic stop shortly after those things. So it's kind of probably very difficult to navigate through.
Absolutely. Sometimes officers have really got to tuck their emotions away, and it's hard for anyone. If you had a bad day, if you were a civilian, you had a bad day at work and you come home, are you going to take those things out on your family? Will your bad day extend into others? And that's something that law enforcement, we're forbidden from that by process. And I guess sometimes the public should, if maybe the officer was short, they're on a traffic stop, and maybe they scolded them, not to say that it may have been correct, but understand that what did that officer maybe experience prior to that? Were they at a domestic where they had a pretty problematic issue trying to sort things out, or did they just see a death or take a report on a child molestation? Things like that may have upset the officer.
Yeah, and on a personal note, I can remember to this day, I was 22 years old and I was a policeman in Washington, D.C., and I can remember going on the scene of a death. And it was a pretty grisly scene. And I was with a guy that was an old timer at that time to me, and he said something kind of interesting. He says you'll kind of get used to it. Well, I can tell you, all these years later, almost 45 years later, I still am not used to it, because to this day it's kind of troubling to see those kind of scenes or to be involved in this kind of investigations or tragic accidents.
I think you find ways to cope with it and make sense of things, but do you really get used to it? I don't think you can, because every scene is different, every situation is different, it may impact you a different way.
And the other thing I think it's really kind of helped out is the fact that our chaplain is Jason Cordell,
yes,
our pastor, and we brought him on about a couple years ago now, and he's been very helpful to you. And you've had a good presence of mind to be able to involve him with some notifications and those kind of things.
He and I, after I used him the first time there, he and I work very well together.
Yeah.
It's nice having a second person there to assist in the conversation. Making death notifications is never easy. It's never an enjoyable process. And you literally have to train yourself to be the presence of mind to try to uplift and understand the family in their grievance process.
And people react in a lot of different ways, don't they?
They do. I've had some where they just are in complete silence. It's almost baffling that they just have nothing to say. Some may have expected the scenario if it was a health issue, and then some just go into complete shock.
And how important would it be to incorporate as part of maybe our in-service training to maybe have a psychologist or someone come in and talk to the deputies? That may be something we want to do as part of our in-service training program in the future.
I think that would be invaluable as far as coping processes for us, and I think the more we know how to cope with our own situations, then our life experiences, we can help persons that we deal with on a daily basis cope. Because we're kind of social worker, law enforcement, and psychologist all wrapped in one when we deal with the public.
And it is amazing when you think about all the responsibilities that a law enforcement officer has to know. They can do anything from, or they go to a domestic dispute, they go to a lost child, they go to a drowning, they go to making an arrest. So it takes years and years of experience and training to learn all the different fingers or aspects that law enforcement officers are called upon to deal with.
Yes, and try and absorb all those things, and your life experiences definitely play into motion as far as how you can help guide people that are in need.
Is there any particular event over the years that you've been involved with, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a tragedy, but something else that really kind of sticks in your mind, something that it had quite an impact on you?
Definitely a car accident involving a teenager that was trapped in a vehicle and just no ability to help.
Right.
Anybody in public safety, law enforcement, fire and EMS, our job is to help. We want to help. And when your hands are tied and you just can't do anything, it's just crippling to us.
Right. With us we have Sgt Lee Hawks, a 20-year veteran and law enforcement. Before you were at the sheriff's office, I know you've had different assignments, didn't you? Different locations, different areas.
A lot of narcotics work. Spent time also on federal task force for a while. That was very enjoyable.
Yeah. And where were you where you started out? If I remember right, were you along the river somewhere?
I was in. I started my career at Put in Bay.
Okay.
In Ottawa County.
Yeah.
So I enjoyed the 2 years up on Lake Erie in the summer times. It was very fun.
Yeah.
And I went all the way down the Ohio River down to Athens County. So I've stayed in Southern Ohio since.
Before we go off, any final thoughts as far as maybe what you envision for the sheriff's office in the future, or for Lee Hawks?
I think keep in mind that as far as the public is concerned, keep in mind what your officers or your other public safety endure on a daily basis. Be careful what you believe on social media.
Or what you see on the news every night, because the reality is, we see a lot of negative things, especially within the last year, and it's really kind of sad because law enforcement officers are involved in events, hundreds of thousands every year, and 99% of the time they're handled very appropriately.
That's correct.
But when something goes wrong, we seem to focus on that.
Yeah.
Well, the clock on the wall says we're just about out of time. With us, Sgt Lee Hawks, a veteran of the Sheriff's Office, does a terrific job and really is dedicated, and we appreciate him and all he does for our community.
Thanks, Sheriff.
Do appreciate you, the viewers and listeners, the students here at Fairfield Christian Academy, our executive producer, Kelly Roberts, and you, the viewers and listeners that are nice enough to be with us each and every week. Till next week, same time, same place. God bless, and we'll see you right here.
In 1929 in Chicago, a gentleman by the name of Marion Wade, a former minor league baseball player, started the company. It was just a moth-proofing company then. In 1952, it expanded to carpet cleaning and pioneered what is now called outsourcing. The Sidwells wanted a community that had a lot of churches, had a lot of soccer opportunities for kids who love soccer, and a good Parks and Rec department, so they chose Lancaster. And so in 1980, they moved the franchise here in Lancaster, to 6th Avenue. But then in 2002, Todd George, current owner, purchased the franchise from them. And in 2004, he bought a building that's on Mulberry Street, and that's where the franchise is located currently. I'm Jay Johnson, General Manager of Service Master Clean by Todd George, where we guarantee if it's not done right the first time, we'll do it again.
Service Master Clean by Todd George, 740-687-1077, 740-687-1077.